Hello, I'm Shaun Richards of Notayesmaneconomics. What I want to talk to you about today is the issue of the banks. This is something that's not really ever gone away, has it, over the last 10 years or so, since the collapses that we saw across various places around the world. The reason how this is coming back into the forefront is twofold, really. One is simply the way bank share prices have behaved. They look dreadful. Now this contrasts, doesn't it, with the way that central bankers love to tell us that things are much better now. The particular word they like is resilient, which, considering their use of language, on its own makes me rather nervous, I do have to say, because what they say is usually the opposite of the state of play. But if you look around in the UK, we see that bank share prices are a bit troubled. The stress tests around Europe show Lloyd's and Barclays a bit short of capital. So that explains why the share prices haven't done so well. RBS, again, took a knock the other day and so on. It's always RBS, isn't it? But if we look around Europe, actually some of the state of play is worse, and indeed, in some cases, much worse. I guess the headliner in this instance is Deutsche Bank, my old employer back in the day. That yesterday, in terms of share price, was dipping towards €8. I think this morning when I checked it, 8.27, so a bit better in terms of a bounce. But that doesn't really change the underlying picture here. Lots of questions about its state of play. Will there be a merger with Commerzbank? What is happening with its derivatives book? How large is it? What's wrong with it? And so on. At any time it looks like there's trouble somewhere, Deutsche Bank takes a hit. There are two main manoeuvres on that front. Well, actually three, sorry to correct myself. One is, say something might happen with Brexit and there's a crunch in the financial world. Next, more recently, we've had a couple of days of sharp drops in the oil price. What's gone on there? Are there derivatives around that? Then, of course, there's Italy. If we move on to other banks, well, next there's the Italian banks. I think that speaks for itself in the current scenario. Got themselves full of Italian government bonds, just in time for them to collapse. And then there's Greece. It's sort of gone off much of the radar now, but places like Piraeus Bank, National Bank of Greece, they've been hitting all-time lows this week. Now, obviously, there's context there that the prices were so low anyway that we're going from 99.999% down to 99 and an extra 9 on the end there. However, they were bailed out not so long ago, and this moves me to the next part of what I wanted to look at today, which is a response to this. Happened on Monday from the euro area authorities, and this is around what's called the European Stability Mechanism, or ESM. That is still deployed in Greece. That was the main place where it stepped forward to suck up a lot of the debt. It has around, according to its annual report, 380 billion it could spend in a crisis, and they've been shuffling around its rules. One thing though I'd like to point out before we start is it only has 80 billion of capital. So we keep finding ourselves in situations where rescue vehicles are actually geared themselves, what's called a special purpose vehicle. I mean, what could go wrong? But the change in the rules here as a headliner, you look at and think the ESM in any future euro area crisis will be stepping up to the plate with the European Commission. So the IMF are going off the list. So it would appear as the European Central Bank. That poses a question in itself. Is why would you step the ECB back? Are you preparing its balance sheet for something else? But if we stick with the European Stability Mechanism, as well as being something to help countries, it now seems to be acquiring a role for backing up banks as part of the reforms in the euro area there. Which then brings us back to why? Brings us back to falling bank share prices. And it raises the question, what happens next? We find an era of them stepping in. And here we get another contradiction, which is when all this plays out, the banks are supposed to put money in for their own bailouts. Except at the minute, how does that work? When we can say that the banks themselves, in terms of their share price and backing, are in quite a weak position. Perhaps as weak as they've been, if we take out the sort of height of the credit crunch. The actual backing in terms of share capital for many of these places isn't very much. And then they're supposed to divvy up to help out others. And this is an issue we've seen a couple of times in the euro area crisis. Happened in Spain. when the strong were supposed to help the weak, except the strong weren't as strong as was claimed. And to some extent, Spain's got away with that because the economy's recovered a bit. Not saying that's a cure, but until now. Italy, though, completely different saga. This is where things weaken after. Again, something that's got forgotten. Atlante, there were two versions of this, the fund. Well, where's the money gone there? Because everything's got worse. And this is a problem. You can weaken the strong through this sort of thing. So is the European stability mechanism being prepared as another bank bailout vehicle? We find that whatever rules there are in the euro area, they get twisted around so that they're ready for next time. There was a deadline of this, of 2024 for the moves, but it seems like they're getting on with it, which again begs the question, getting on ready for what? So there's a few things to think about there. The fund is being got ready. It can borrow cheaply. Now that is the real gain of this, for those of you wondering, what's the point of this? It borrows at round about over 5 years, 0.25% or something like that. So it's enabled to borrow, not quite the same terms as Germany, but Germanic rates. So that's cheap. In a country or bank bailout, that's a good thing, obviously. You want to be able to help them as cheaply as possible. But this time round, how much of an advantage will that be? Because you see now, these places are hitting trouble, in general, with cheap interest rates, aren't they? Low bond yields, that sort of thing. So it won't be the gain it was last time round. So there's quite a bit to think about there, I think, excuse me. As we look at the issue now, banks and that, why are they getting ready for this? And this isn't just the euro area. For example, the Bank of England has plans going through for an increase in capital, plans to borrow more. It looks to me like they're getting ready for trouble again. Well, if so, what? Thank you.